things on why I believe the community needs this project. Not only to help deter crime, to document violent events, but to help the city as a whole be able to use technology to its advantage. Be able to document our community events, whether or not it's in the summertime, wintertime. We are increasingly growing in our population. Our traffic is increasing, and it is a point to where it's hard for our officers to be in all parts of the city. It's hard for them to be able to patrol all parts of the city, and this is one of the options that we can use technology for that has been used a lot of communities around us to help basically keep our community safe. Here's our special events of concern. With the 4th of July being one of our biggest events that we have throughout the year, our city grows to 60, 70,000 for days on end. It's very difficult for us to be able to document and keep everybody safe when we have every officer working in the department, but we're only eyes on the ground, we're not eyes in the sky to try and figure out if we get missing children, if we get any type of major event, if we get storms, if we get any type of weather-related event that we can use for this project. When it comes to protecting our parks, we have the ability to use different types of cameras, which I'll get into, but we would focus our parks with certain types of cameras and our city with other types of cameras. The nice thing with this project is if we feel the need that we need to add different cameras or more cameras around, it's a basic price, and they can add a camera here or wherever we think we might need one. The nice thing with this system is we own the data, the company owns the equipment. So if something goes down, the company will come out, they will be the ones that fix those types of cameras or any problems that we might have. So the big part is what is actually flock safety. Okay, there's two different types of cameras that we're looking at for the city. One is license plate readers. The other one is a live IP camera. The IP cameras would go into the parks. The reason the IP cameras would go into the parks is they are able to be viewed by Mr. Adams. They're able to be viewed by the police department, and they are able to be movable and recording at all times. They are recording for 30 days, and if we need to pull data or information from there, we can do that. If you get into the LPR cameras or license plate recognition cameras, those only take pictures. Those are not live cameras. They do not track individuals. If somebody wants to go in and look at one of those, that is something they're going to have a very good reason to do. One of the things I want to bring to note is what it is not. It's not tied to personal identifiable information. So anybody that drives around the metro area, I guarantee has drove by these cameras. The only time they are gonna activate or they're gonna alert us is if somebody has a warrant for arrest, if it's an Amber Alert car, or if it's something that we're looking for specifically, which we have to have a reason to do. The data is not stored beyond 30 days. State law in Minnesota gives us 60 days, but we're choosing 30, so it's shorter. Statistically, it shows that we are able to solve 9.1% more crime rate in order to do this. Kind of, if you want to look at it as, there's a lot of people in town that have Ring cameras, and we optimize and use Ring cameras on a daily basis to try and solve crime. This is something for us to kind of use as a Ring camera in town to be able to do that. So some of the partnering cities and agencies that currently have this system, the bolded ones are ones that are directly tied right to Forest Lake. They have the access and an agreement that we can operate and use the data that we are having with them. So for example, Stillwater PD had a violent felony domestic assault. The individual, they identified and had a license plate. They knew that he lived in the state of New Jersey. They were able to follow him through these systems all the way through Wisconsin back to New Jersey, and New Jersey was waiting for him when he arrived at his house. We're able to put in vehicles that we know that we're looking for, and the system will be able to pick up on those. So that is one of the things that is beneficial for us. So because the majority of our calls for service that we come into are in our southwest district of the city, these cameras will help us optimize to be able to not be down there all the time personally, and we can cover more of the city as needed. So the other thing that I want to bring about with these is here's the maps on where the city would be, where these cameras would be. So as you can see on this, the 3 live cameras, IP cameras, 2 would be located at Fenway Park. That would cover the parking lots, the park itself, and the other one would be in Lakeside Park. These cameras will have the ability to zoom in up to 800 feet to read a license plate. And why is that important for us, for our communities? Because Fenway, every summer, every weekend, has thousands of people there for community events, for tournaments. If we have a situation where there's a child abduction, something is going on that nature, we have the ability to help identify that person right now, right here. The live camera in the park will greatly help us keep our community safe during the 4th of July when we have thousands of people in the park. We'll be able to use that and optimize that, as well as any traffic control. The other LPR cameras are positioned in entries and exits to our town. So that's why they're positioned there. So for example, Anoka County, they have one on 97 on the opposite side of the freeway where you would enter into Running Aces. They are gonna initiate, within the next few months, they will have another one on Broadway that enters Anoka County. Chisago County is now implementing them, so they will have the northern border. And the last discussions I had with Washington County Sheriff's Office, they're looking at putting them on their county roads. So, like I mentioned, the license plate readers, what they do is they take snapshots. They just take pictures. They're taking a picture of the license plate, they're taking a picture, if they can, of the individual that's driving. The only way that we can operate or grab that information is if we were to say, run your driver's license. I have to have a reason to do that. I have to enter a reason to do that, and I also have to have a case number just to be able to view that. That's how this system works too. After 30 days, that data's gone. Whether or not we pull it or not, it's gone. So the policies are consistent with our policies as far as what it takes for us to be able to run my driver's license and look my photograph up. I have to have a reason. If I don't have a reason, then that's against policy, which could be subject to discipline and or criminal activity. Here's what the proposal for the next steps. We purchase and install this spring. We coordinate with Parks and Rec to determine the best locations for the cameras. We're gonna assess the 4th of July, the Arts in the Park, the Fenway tournaments, to see how much deterrence and how much more safe we can make these events, knowing that people will have an idea that these are out there. I would also like to complete analysis at a 6-month and a 1-year mark to see, have our vandalisms gone down? Have our juveniles in our parks overnight gone down? Have we been able to stop or deter more crime or catch more criminals that may have done some type of crime that we would have never been able to catch before? How effective are these? And if they are effective, is there more that we need to cover the city?
All right. Any questions? Council, initial.
With the Towards the end there, you talk about deterrence. Is there signage up that says that these are in place, or what do you see them being as far as a deterrence standpoint?
What I'd like to do is, if we were able to put these cameras up, is we would post it on our website to say, we now are operating under this system and give this map to the community. Say, here's where they are, here's what they look like, here's where the poles are. I would like to be able to, with, in conjunction with Mr. Adams, is put signs up in our parks to say, there are live cameras that are up on the park. One of the nice things with the park cameras is the AI technology that's involved. So we can set the system to say if there are more than 20 individuals in one of our parks at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's probably something that's not going well. That can alert Mr. Adams, that can alert our officers. This system directly is integrated right into our MVCs with our squad cars. So if a stolen vehicle enters our city at Broadway and Elmcrest, it's gonna alert our officers that there's someone coming into the city, here's what that vehicle is. I know that, when criminals start to understand and learn that, hey, you don't wanna go to this city because they have this technology, this is what I'm hoping this is gonna help. I really hope this is gonna help our parks, deter the vandalism and the damage to property, and it's also gonna help us, solve a lot more retail crime that we have in our Southwest District.
So ideally, it would be really a press release, big PR campaign to get this out so that, for that part, we let people know that they're, but then more on the criminal side of things. I guess if they're sophisticated enough criminals to pick and choose where to go based on where cameras are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A majority of our, and Detective Olsted can attest to this, majority of our burglaries and majority of our thefts, over the last few years, they're not people that live in Forest Lake. They're people that live outside our community that are coming to our community, and we want to deter them from coming. And if we can solve a handful of these, then the word gets out, they're not gonna come to our city, because they know that these are getting, and that's why they're strategically placed in the entry and exit points of the city.
The cameras that are in the parks, do they have like a distance or a radius that they can actually get clarity on and you can see? Is there a limit on that?
Yeah.
And then how do you secure those cameras from being vandalized, destroyed, broken, or stolen? Are they electric? Are they battery operated? How are they installed?
So there's two different options. They can be run off their own solar, or they can be hardwired. The initial plan for the camera in Lakeside Park would be somewhere on top of the pavilion. They're dome cameras, so they are secured to a point of that. If somebody does try and vandalize or damage, they're gonna be right on camera, doing it. And we might also get an alert depending on how we write the settings on it. But like I said earlier, they have the capability to zoom in and read a license plate at 800 feet. So one camera will be able to cover a vast majority of Lakeside Park, and two will cover most all of Fenway Park.
Maybe you have this next, but maybe a reminder of costs. I know there's public safety dollars looking to use and an ongoing recurring expense.
Sure. So right now, for the 13 cameras, the LPRs and the 3 live view cameras, the quote that we have for 1 year, for this would be year one, would be $52,350. The annual recurring would be $48. It's basically $3,000 per camera a year. They did give us a almost $5,000 discount to try and be able to put these up this year. And speaking with Mr. Adams, that cost sharing would be between parks and PD going forward. So a 2-year total contract for this would be $103,350.
So the idea is after the recurring expense be split like a 50-50 with parks, or what, do we know what the breakdown between the PD's budget and the?
So we had discussed that the cameras in the parks, the specific live IP cameras, those will be paid for by parks, and then LPRs would be under the police budget.
And what do you initially getting it up and running, that, like, is it a couple staff people, is it specifically you, or is it gonna be a kind of team to get these things up and running, and then is it like the ongoing daily, I mean, it's probably pretty remote where if something comes, everyone who's working that day gets that shift gets some kind of notice, and how does that all work?
So once, so Flock Safety System, they'll do all the installing and they'll do the training for us. All of our officers will have the ability to, basically, it's its own software webpage where you'll pull it up on their mobile data computer in the squad car. And if it's up, they'll get the alerts on active that's going on. Everybody that I would say in like detectives, they'll be able to review data to see if they have, if we have a theft of a motor vehicle that's delayed that came in, they'll be able to check that system to see, did that license plate leave somewhere, did it run somewhere that way? And as far as when it comes to the kind of ongoing, the one thing that is required per audit is we will have to pull the numbers every 2 weeks and keep that for a biannual audit that has to go to the BCA. And basically what that says is how many cars did the LPR system pull up? How many times did we pull the recordings from the parks? But everybody will be kind of involved in this project.
The previous council, is in our public safety conversation, budget conversation last year, gave you kind of the green light on this, and so I think it's great that it came back and they let new council have some thoughts on it, so I guess if there's any concerns with you, Jeff, or Kevin on this, you were in the business, and
I
you
was
know
in the
the
business.
value of that, I suspect.
It's a great tool. I'm glad they're utilizing that. I think it'll be very helpful for our community. Once the citizens realize the benefit, the protection it offers them, also the protection it offers the police department, for instance, in the park or activity that's coming into the community. Great asset. Good job.
Yeah, I think anything that, our job is obviously to, public safety is one of our jobs as well, and I think anything we can do to ensure our citizens that, they're more secure and it's more safe, I'm all for it.
Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, I did have a number of concerns that I was able to talk with Chief Peterson and Captain Hanegraaff about. I think I'm comforted by their answers to my questions. I think we talked about, first of all, this is $50,000 a year that you're committing to, not today, but really in perpetuity. I mean, it's gonna be tough to take this away from the public once you have it out there, and that's no small potatoes. That's a third of an officer, maybe not quite that much anymore, but it's a good chunk towards the next person that we want to hire someday. So there's that, and the next question, of course, is the big brother question, right? I mean, how far do you go? And this is just an internal question for policing, right? I mean, is an officer sitting in his car in the park any different than a camera? The camera's gonna be there 24/7 at a lot less cost than an officer, right? And I think you can argue that it's a horse apiece. I think people just feel more comfortable when humans doing it as opposed to cameras everywhere. So, that's a question for you as the council. Where do your sensibilities lie? Is it, directed a little bit more this way, or is it, a little bit more of I don't like people watching me everywhere I go, right? So there's that question, but I think some of the things we have in place, the idea that Captain Hanegraaff talked about, which is that in order to go look at this footage, you have to have a reason, right? So not just a reason, but you're putting your name on, yep, I went and looked on Tuesday, March, whatever, I went and looked at this thing. So there's always that sort of scenario of the rogue cop that decides he's gonna spy on his ex-wife or something, right? And that's just an icky feeling for us all to even think about that kind of stuff, but we've seen cases of that in the police community over the last decade or two. And what Captain Hanegraaff talked about was that every 2 weeks, they're gonna be pulling that data. So if officer so-and-so is, twice a week checking in the park with his kids from his former marriage are out in the park, that's gonna be pretty obvious real quick, right? So I think there's some protections against that kind of stuff that are built in here, not just to our policies, but to state law, right? So there's some reporting that we have into the state on this kind of stuff. So I think those protections built in with this are a big part of what makes me feel comfortable with it. So I think it's pretty much those two issues is cost and big brother, and where we land on those two things.
Yeah, I think especially, it seems like lately, there's missing people, and, it's the gentleman up from Wyoming that they were searching for, and maybe that could help find him. I remember a couple of years ago, a teen was missing, and the police department reached out to us looking for security, footage from our security cameras, and so they made this less having to do that, and so, I'm concerns too on the Big Brother thing. I like the idea that it's only 30 days and that there are things in place to kind of review any of the concerns about that. So I think it's great that we have that technology. It's available to us. We know how to use it. I would really like, and maybe we can have conversations with Commissioner Miron, but Washington County could jump on board. It's interesting that Chisago and Anoka already have it. If we can get Washington County, that would just have that much more coverage. I think that would be helpful. But it's a great opportunity for us. So next steps then?
Sounds like there's consensus on this. There's a couple of things. Last time we discussed this, we talked about the public safety funding portion of it, or even all of it, and I'm not sure if you still would like to go that route. So the full cost is $100,350 for 2 years. So that would be something, we do have public safety funding available for this. To deter the cost until 2027.
I guess having our finance person, but is that how we looked at it? Was it gonna be the 2 years through public safety, or just that first year?
I thought it was the first year initially, wasn't it?
It was supposed to initially.
Okay.
Is the ongoing cost of this baked into the 10-year plan that was done last year?
No. I got it.
Grant funding or anything like that for possible future purchases of more cameras or just?
That probably is a question for our emergency managers, because there possibly could be an opportunity.
There's a big partnership going on right now with the retail and the private sector using these cameras. And I know one way that other cities are able to defer some of the cost is if they get, for an example, our dealerships on 19th Street Southwest, they all share the cost of a camera. And so we can put another one up there. Or if there's another, I know that Target and Walmart have been in the talks with this same type of system. So there are ways to build the system without having additional costs to the city minus the, original 13 that we have.
So do we need to, I don't know, there is, even with 1 year, there is fund balance on public safety dollars for next year. Do we need to make that, should we make that decision when we approve this?
I would
2 years,
say-
where 2 years of funding are coming from?
Yeah, I think it would be wise to do that.
Okay.
We'll have that discussion internally, I think, and bring that forward to you with the proposal at the next council meeting. Assuming we have a solid quote from these folks, we'll bring that quote to you and contract and all that kind of stuff. So perhaps not the next meeting if we don't have all those details worked out, but we'll bring this back to you fairly soon with a contract and that funding source.
Okay. Great, anything else? Thanks for your work on this, guys. All right, the next item, Hill Coin ordinance, Volstead and Amanda. Lead us on this one.
Yes. I think we're waiting for the next slideshow. So council, we
talked just very briefly about this in staff updates at a council meeting, and I think it was maybe on a weekly update to just start to get council thinking about this. But I've been working with Detective Nathan Olstad. I'm not sure if everybody on council has met him, but this is Detective Olstad. And he reached out to me about the beginning of this year about an issue that is going on in the city related to cryptocurrency kiosks. And so we'll walk through some proposed legislation or ordinance that we have. So first, introduction to Detective Olstad, and then what are cryptocurrency kiosks, the current regulations that exist around these kiosks, how they are used in fraud, and then what your options are, and looking for your feedback. So first, as I mentioned, this is Detective Olstad. He is a detective with the Forest Lake PD. He focuses on cryptocurrency-related crimes. He's involved in AARP education and training. He's connected with several local and national law enforcement groups and listservs, just people who are trying to problem solve what has become a very large issue for not just Forest Lake, but frankly, everybody everywhere. Just a plug for him. I'm just so impressed with how hard he is working to try to help people who've been impacted by these crimes. It is, I know you have a great police force, but I am just so impressed with him. So just a plug for Nathan. So sorry, hope I didn't embarrass you. So cryptocurrency kiosks. These are just two examples of what they look like. They are a machine that allows a consumer to go in and purchase or sell cryptocurrency. Typically, they are going to be purchasing cryptocurrency, and they will be using cash or debit cards sometimes to do so, overwhelmingly cash. They look like an ATM. They are often at gas stations, Walgreens, those types of things. Most of these kiosks are going to just sell the cryptocurrency, but like I said, sometimes you can purchase it. I think what's important to know is that these kiosks have significant markup on cryptocurrency. So they are, if I were to go online through an online app and purchase cryptocurrency, I might be paying a per transaction fee of $1 or pretty minimal fees. If I want to buy cryptocurrency at one of these kiosks, the markup is 20 to 30%. I think that's important because what that means is that a true cryptocurrency investor is never going to buy from a kiosk, because why would you do that? These are very new to the marketplace. 5 years ago, they didn't exist. There is some regulation around the kiosks themselves or the kiosk operators. Federally, the kiosk operators need to register with the U.S. Treasury Department as a money service business. Really isn't any additional regulation, but they do need to register. So for example, Bitcoin Depot is a brand. What are some other brands?
Athena.
Yeah, so they would all,
But there's probably a dozen different kiosks out there.
kiosk company, yeah. So the kiosks themselves aren't regulated or tracked, so it isn't as though you necessarily know where they all are. You can go onto like Google and you could type in, find a kiosk, and it, there could be some advertisement that way, but regulation, no. State regulations, the kiosk operators do need to obtain a license with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And just in the last year, the state also created some additional regulation around these cryptocurrency kiosks. Specifically, there are certain disclosure requirements, so sort of the warning sign that says, hey, this machine might be used in fraud, please be careful. There's some daily limits for new customers, and there's also some fraud protections for new customers. I think importantly, for the purposes of considering an ordinance or some sort of additional regulation at the city level, the state regulation defines a new customer as someone who has been a customer at that kiosk for less than 72 hours. The problem is that the criminals who are using these kiosks for fraud give their victim a QR code that connects the victim to the criminal's account, essentially at the kiosk. So from the purposes of the state law, there is no new customer. They never existed, right? physically they were there in front of the kiosk depositing their thousands of dollars of hard-earned money, but from the transactions perspective, they don't exist. So the kiosk use in fraud schemes, the numbers are shockingly large. According to the FBI in 2023, $5.6 billion was lost to cryptocurrency fraud. 189 million of that was through these kiosks. Locally in Forest Lake, from 2023 to 2024, victims lost $300,000 in reported fraud due to the kiosks. White Bear Lake saw 125,000, and Woodbury from 2021 to 2024 has reported $6.6 million in cryptocurrency losses, both online and kiosk, just how they track it. Law enforcement estimates that about 1/3 of the actual amount of fraud gets reported. So, I mean, these are large numbers to begin with, but to think that they only account for 1/3 of the losses that are out there, that's really significant. In your packet, there was a fairly long story or narrative from a victim who went through what happened and how she was convinced to, in that case, she was led to believe that she had an outstanding warrant for her arrest because she failed to show up for jury duty. And just her experience of staying on the phone with this particular criminal as she went to the bank and withdrew funds that she did not have. She was taking out, money on a credit card and driving around trying to deposit this money into these kiosks. Meanwhile, she has a husband that has medical issues and she's, the sole provider. And it's just, it's incredible, frankly, kind of the depravity of the way that the victims are being preyed upon and the sophistication of the scheme. I think it's easy to think, well, it's obvious you don't do this, but in this situation, the example in your packet, they called her, she hung up on them, they called her back from what looked like, a line from the Isani County. So she's believing this is a legitimate government employee, in this case, a police officer. And they stay on the phone with her and they have, talk tracks for what she's supposed to say to the teller at the bank. And it's just the sophistication and the sophistication around how to prey on these victims is horrific. And it's just insane how good they are at it. So as I mentioned, they typically like to manipulate, intimidate, or threaten their victims. The population group, the victim population group is overwhelmingly elderly. They definitely target widows. They look for people who have had somebody who's been recently deceased. I kind of went through a lot of these. Depending upon how that scheme works, they might be having the victim deposit at multiple kiosks. Sometimes these kiosks are out, and so they'll have them drive from city to city to deposit money. At this point, I'm hoping that Nathan can share just a little bit about your perspective working with these victims.
Again, hi Mayor, hi Council, thanks for having me here. I was asked by the city attorney to, if I need this, can everybody hear me? To come in and give some examples and some of my experience with dealing with the fraud that is revolving around Bitcoin. I do have some printouts if you guys want to. You're okay if I hand some of that stuff out? I can. So, these are a couple flyers that we initially printed out and put on the kiosks. They've been out for about a year. As kind of a prevention technique. The kiosks are now they're regulated to have some of that language on the screen. So it's directly on the screen when someone walks up to the kiosk. So having the poster there really didn't do anything because even having it directly on the kiosk doesn't prevent the fraud. These are some direct reports that have been redacted. These can be kept. The first two are from our police department, and then the last two are from police departments in other parts of the country. So, like Amanda had said, I'm part of it's actually a global wide, kind of a Bitcoin investigation listserv for emails. And, you see some of these reoccurring scams and they're happening just in Forest Lake, in Colorado, in Washington. So, it's kind of a, global wide issue with these kiosks and Bitcoin. And this is just the statute. And I highlighted the part that Amanda had talked about that should cover and protect citizens from using these kiosks. There's a clause in there that defines a new customer. Anybody that's being defrauded is listed as kind of a new customer, and what these scammers end up doing is they give them a verified criminal wallet. So then when you go to get money back from these kiosk companies, they say, well, no, that's not a new customer. That wallet has been in existence for months. So then they say, too bad. So these are print-offs of the information that lady had got that is part of that story that was presented in the packet. And this gives a really good example of when the scammers, when they talk to somebody on the phone and you kind of wonder, how could somebody fall for this? That's what she ended up getting. So there's a lot of like legal terms on there. There's logos and different police department identifiers that she was getting sent to make her believe that she was wanted for this felony warrant for missing a murder trial. So, and she was on the phone for I think 6 hours or something like that. And here, sorry, there's a lot, but this is just an investigative packet from one of my Bitcoin investigations. And those I'll need back at the end. I wasn't able to redact some of the information out of there. But it goes over, some of the information I put in the report, some of the legal process that I send out to try and get money back from these Bitcoin kiosks. And then I highlighted, there's a receipt in there that you get from the kiosk after you buy Bitcoin, and it shows the markup value. So like Amanda had said, they're selling Bitcoin at X amount when the market price is 30% less than that. So, yeah.
So are these, in most cases, are they being scammed, and they're not willing participants in Bitcoin, they don't wanna do it?
Most of them don't even know what Bitcoin is. Yeah, majority of them are elderly. I do ARP presentations, and then I'll ask, if anybody knows what digital currency is, digital assets are. A lot of them even don't know how it works at all. And the one machine up at the Holiday gas station store, the employees will even see people come in all confused, standing at the kiosk, and they'll ask them, questions like, what you're doing, you need help. And they're so wrapped up into the scam that, they just brush everyone off. We had our evidence technician actually stop a kiosk fraud. The lady was elderly and had $16,000 in cash in an envelope that she was trying to figure out how to pump into this machine. So, and even after like numerous attempts to get her to stop, get off the phone, let me talk to you. She's like, I know what I'm doing, I know who this is. So you get so wrapped up in the story, just like the information I was presented in that jury duty case, and she's getting all this, all these legal looking, texts and emails, that you get tunnel vision on just how do I get out of this situation. So, and some of them are way worse than like a jury duty threat. Some of them are really, really bad.
So that's the problem. I mean, it's a very real problem. So what can you do about it? Because obviously there is there's very little federal control. There is a little bit of regulation at the state level, as we've established. Because of how it was drafted, it is not effective on arrival because of how they're using the envelope or the crypto wallets. So you do have, at this point, from the analysis that we've done, basically 3 options. You can choose to do nothing at this time. You can wait and see if the state is going to come forward with additional legislation or if there might be something at the federal level. There's definitely a lot of attention happening around this right now. The state of Iowa, I believe, is Iowa or Ohio, in the class action lawsuit.
Yep, there's a class action lawsuit out of South Carolina.
Oh,
Just-
that's where it is.
Just it's a general lawsuit against, it's Bitcoin Depot, I believe, and Circle K. And then there's a Supreme Court case that is going on in Iowa, where the Attorney General did an investigation, and they requested transactions from these kiosks, and then they had staff look into tracking some of the people down that put money into them, and they found out that 98% or so of the people that they contacted said that they were scammed. So, and like Amanda alluded to, white collar crime is usually 70% underreported.
So, but you do, I mean, there are other, I mean, there's certainly chatter around, but from my conversations with the general counsel for the Minnesota Department of Commerce and the League of Minnesota Cities, there is not anything right now that is planned at the legislature. This is not a league item. I have asked and kind of tried to encourage them to reconsider that, and they were not open to additional topics for this year. So I don't believe you would see legislation in the 2025 cycle. Your second option would be to register these kiosks, and that's the ordinance that's included in your packet. And that would be registering the ordinance, registering these kiosks to hopefully prevent the bad kiosks from operating. Interestingly, unless this is different, okay. So interestingly, there's one kiosk in the city that has not had any reported instances of fraud. That's the one that's located in the Cub Foods. Why they are different, it's anybody's guess. Potentially they might require different identification or different process, or perhaps they're just not known about, who knows? But potentially there is a way to do these without being rampant with fraud going through your machine. So the idea with registering the kiosks is that it would allow a kiosk operator who does not have basically a bad track record to be able to continue to operate within the city. The registration would work like this. The property owner, so in this case, the Cub Foods or the Holiday gas station would be the responsible party to register because they're the landowner and this is a land use, so it's going to go ultimately under them. They would register the kiosk with the city. They need to pay a registration fee. I would argue that that fee should be fairly large, a couple $1,000s, because there is a significant amount of work that has to go into sort of monitoring these kiosks. And we need to cover our costs for this project. And we have the right to, under state statute, to cover our costs. They would need to have a camera, a designated camera installed for the machine. We would have some signage requirements, but the biggest thing that we would be requiring is that there would be, they would need to have written confirmation from the Forest Lake Police Department that that particular kiosk operator, say Bitcoin Depot, has not had more than 3 instances of verified fraud in any kiosk in the city in the last 12 months. Because of the nature of these particular crimes, they are not, there isn't a criminal to bring to justice, right? These are not being prosecuted. So we can't use prosecution as the test. So instead it is as determined by the Forest Lake Police Department, it is a substantiated instance of fraud. And if they have 3 or more of those in the last 12 months, that operator is not allowed to operate a kiosk anywhere in the city. And I think that that has good standing when you look at the state statute, because the state statute, remember, has that provision around protecting new customers. And that new customers can have their money back, get their money back if they were a victim of fraud. And the test in the state statute is that, one, the person states, I was frauded, and two, that they have filed a report with a police department or some sort of law enforcement. That's the only test in the statute. So our test is even a little further because it would require the police department to, have the report, look at the documents, and do a little bit deeper analysis to determine, yes, this truly was fraud. So that's kind of the biggest protection in this registration ordinance, is it hopefully keeps out some of these, most of these, all of these bad actors. The third option would be to ban the kiosks outright. This is something that is being considered in Stillwater. It is being considered in Hastings and Cottage Grove. The potential issues with banning these kiosks outright are that the Minnesota Department of Commerce and the League of Minnesota have advised me that that is not a good idea. So although they can't point to a law that would be in violation of, they have both said we think that's a step too far. The other issue is the land use issue, and that is under state law, if you prohibit a use, and so it's no longer permitted, somebody who was doing that use before you put that law into effect is considered a grandfathered use, and they're allowed to continue. So how we would deal with the existing kiosks is a bit tricky. Potentially, there's an argument to be made that they're not a use. I'm not sure how that argument would play out. So what I'm trying to do, and ultimately these options are the council's, but what I'm trying to do is give you some options and hopefully balance some of the litigation risks with the very obvious public safety risks that these kiosks pose to the community. So those are the three options that we have on the table for you tonight. And we are looking for feedback. We're open to additional questions, or if you want us to go back to the drawing board and look for a fourth option, we can do that too.
Yeah, option two, which I like the best. You talked, so the registration is happening by the property owner, Cub, Walgreens, whatever. If there's verified fraud, are we saying that they can no longer have those kiosks, or is it the Bitcoin Depot that can't be in there, so they could switch to another brand?
They could switch to another brand. One of the things that we're asking for is that they have to provide their lease agreement. Because what we have discovered, and what has been discovered particularly in some of like the class action lawsuit, is that these leases are have a profit sharing component. So the Holiday gas station gets a portion of everything that runs through. So while this has yet to be vetted, there is an argument to be made that they're a little bit culpable in some of this behavior that's going on, or at least have an incentive to look the other way when the old lady is at the machine trying to put in her money because they're making money out of her.
So do we know if there's certain brands that are more fraud, used more often for fraud?
The Bitcoin Depot kiosk is our number one kiosk for fraud. There's other kiosks that we don't have in our city. They're Athena, they're called Athena kiosks. There's some that are close to our city, but those two, I would say, are the biggest players for the scammers.
Just curious, if we go down that route, it's 3, frauds in 12 months. What's to stop them from flipping to another one, and then it's a whole other year's worth of fraud happening? Is there a shorter leash?
Yeah, and that's absolutely something we could do a shorter leash. We could do a fewer number of instances. The ordinance that you have for your consideration can be modified. I've been a little bit more on the conservative side, just to protect from a litigation perspective, but I do think that we are very well covered in that regard, as opposed to just like an outright ban, right? We're saying you absolutely can operate in the city. Well, it seems, I'm not quite sure what the legitimate purpose is for the business. You just have to behave. That's it. Whatever you have to do to make sure that your kiosk isn't, used for fraud, that's your business. I'm not going to tell you how to figure that out. That's your job. But if you do it, then you can, operate.
Do you know from your work if there are certain brands or these that are are more against fraud and they just have, there's some level of security or login that makes them less attractive to these scammers?
There is, and I think I had sent Amanda, an email that I had gotten, it was a coin flip kiosk. See, these kiosks, they can self-regulate, they're not. So like Bitcoin Depot could self-regulate. You could put provisions in there that funds aren't going to be dispersed, until there's a 72-hour window, and that would allow the victims to try and recoup their money. And under the statute, typically, what we have been doing before the statute had been enacted is we were able to get the transactional fee back. So, which is up to 30%. So, and some of the transactions are extremely large. You could put in $25,000 at once if you have an established wallet. So you're getting some of that money back. Well, then they enacted the state statute. Well, that 30% really isn't digging into their coffers, because it's just a transactional fee. That would be their overall profit. The statute says, no, you have to give all of the money back. So now they're refunding the entire portion that the victim put in when that portion's been spent on Bitcoin. So now it's hitting their bottom line. So they could self-regulate to say, before we're gonna go out and just spend this cash that got put in here on Bitcoin, it's gonna sit in reserve for 3 days to allow some type of an investigation. And so they don't do that. But to your question, there is an ATM company that does and has set up some guidelines on how they're gonna operate.
I just wonder, as we think through this option, if there's some element of that that should be incorporated.
My concern with getting too much into the business of how they're operating the kiosk is who's going to be, from the city level, monitoring that and has the technology time under, all of that to do that. Which is why I like the property owner, because ultimately it's their property. At the end of the day, what they're putting on their property, it's no different than the, like tobacco vending machines of 40 years ago or whatever. It's kind of the same, it's their property, it's, at the end of the day, it's on them. We're able to cite them administratively. We can give them a $2,000 fine every day that they are out of compliance. That's a motivator to get into compliance pretty quickly, right? So we have some ability, I think, to get to the property owner in a way that I don't know how we exactly chase this sort of amorphous kiosk operator that may or may not have any presence in our, real legitimate presence in our state. No, one thing I will mention, my understanding is that there is a couple of states that they're actually seizing the machines. So the police department is saying, well, your cash is in that machine because you just deposited that this morning. You realized you were frauded. You came into the police department this afternoon to file a report. Your $16,000 is sitting right there. So we're going to take the machine and we're going to seize it as an instrument in the crime. That is beyond my pay grade in terms of how that would play out in a court of law, and that is being litigated right now in a court of law. And so I'm not suggesting that that's something that the police department does. That has been something that, at least here in Minnesota, has been advised from the AG's office and the like, that probably not the way to go. But there are a lot of different, I don't know if solutions is the right word, but a lot of different reactions that are happening.
How much time do you think you've had in this, going after these scams since it's become an issue? I mean, it's hard to even put a number
Boy,
on
that's
that.
hard to quantify. A lot, yeah. And you have to wait. See, if you send out legal process, then there's a waiting period for them to get back to you. Sometimes they don't, so then you have to hound them. For some of those transactional fee refunds, it was a constant process to get those folks their money back. And they were just glad to get anything back. So, because a lot of times, Bitcoin is kind of like the wild, wild west a little bit. No one really knows what to do with it. I was in discussion with Amanda, and in that email listserv that I'm with, people are constantly asking for ordinances. So I sent out a draft of ours to a couple agencies, one in Colorado, one in Idaho, that are looking for some type of help to try and curb the fraud that's going on with them. So, I don't know if there's any other city in the state that has an ordinance yet. Everybody's kind of asking about them. So,
Which cities are considering banning?
Stillwater, Cottage Grove, and Hastings right now. Woodbury has asked for our ordinance, so I did send that over to the detective that kind of does their white crimes, and my firm also represents Woodbury, so I included our city attorney that does that city. I'm encouraging Blaine to look at it as well, because the reality is you kind of all need to do something, or they're just gonna have you drive to Columbus, or they're just gonna have you drive wherever. And so ideally, this is something that will get picked up, assuming that you want to do something. I'm on a city attorney listserv, and so then my intention is to put the ordinance out there along with the memo and everything, and encourage, other cities to take a look at it, because it's so devastating for the people who are the victims who are involved.
Well, the reason I ask on that is just, I think obviously something needs to be done, we have to do something. If those other cities are willing to stick their neck out first, then maybe we can just pause and see how that goes, cause I'm free business and competition, all that. I'm not a big ban something, but this is crazy. And the cost that it is to the city and taxpayers because of this, on top of the people that are getting fraud, it's just, where do you put that number at? So, again, I'm not a big person to ban things, but I'd almost like to see how maybe that plays out a little bit. And I don't know, at the same time, we can maybe start I don't know what's the best, makes sense, but maybe agree with some of that, or I just think that even if we put these regulations in, however we write this ordinance, there's gonna be workarounds, it's gonna continue to cost taxpayers money, and that's a flaw, so.
I think the more we put into it,
Shorter
the better off we are.
I guess,
Or whether they go somewhere else, at least they're saying, hey, Forest Lake, they got all these regulations and this, that, and the other thing. Find someplace else to go.
Yeah.
That's probably not the right thing, but
Right,
it's a
but
start.
at least it cuts, maybe it's our taxpayers' cost of police department resources to investigate this stuff.
I think the sooner we can get an ordinance out there, the sooner we can hopefully find loopholes if there are any, and just try to continuously make the ordinance better. So I'm more in favor of option 2.
There's a lot of other professions that we regulate for the public's best interest. I don't see this as any different.
I mean, it's a wild west, so how much do we want to continue to chase it? Because it's so, not the service, it's a man gonna have to be mending this thing on a monthly basis, and it's just getting more expense, but.
Mayor, to answer that question, I would say if we went after the kiosk company themselves, I think you're absolutely 100% right. But I think regulating the business is going to lessen the amount that they're going to be able to work around getting machines in.
Well, that's really the goal, is for the holidays and the Cub Foods to say, this isn't worth it, never mind. There's no business that their business is cryptocurrency kiosks in the city. It's businesses who have a different business, and they're just hoping to make a little extra money by having the kiosk. And so hopefully we're making it so it's just not worth the headache, because there is so little regulation around these kiosks that they just say, forget it, go someplace else. And obviously that doesn't solve the problem forever, but at least it's, given Forest Lake's location off of 35, my understanding is a lot of these victims are people who live a little north of here, who are driving down into the city for the purpose of depositing in these kiosks.
Well, looks like the consensus would be just option 2 and put that through. Any thoughts, Mark?
No, I think you guys are all on the right track here. Do option 2 and still hope for option 1, like other people jumping on this ahead of the Woodbury's of the world. Hopefully, litigate this a little faster than we can too, so. But probably trying to get something in place that makes it a little bit tougher for people to maybe add new ones too, right? The more that we get, the more problem of grandfathering type of issues we have. Would there be an opportunity then, Amanda, to sort of say, we have strike out with our 3 occurrences, then you're out of the business, and once that's gone, you can't come back for a while, so we have, perpetuate, to the latest point about getting a different brand. It seems like once someone has demonstrated they can't control this, it might be time to give them a good chunk of time ban until they get new ownership or something like that.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
to minimize the number of places that are unruly, right?
What I'm hearing is what council would like to see is perhaps ratcheting down the timeframe in which they have to make fraud choices. And then I already do in the ordinance have a provision that says you basically can't come back and get a license if yours got suspended, or registration, if yours was suspended, if yours was denied for whatever reason, you're on timeout for, I think it's 2 years. But I'll look at that and, make sure that that's, all of those things are as strong as they can be. The one thing I do want to say is the nice thing about registration, as opposed to that issue with banning, is you don't have a land use right to not get a license or to not get a registration. So I don't have to worry about that grandfather issue. I don't care that they exist today. If I tell them tomorrow there's this registration, they have to register tomorrow. So that gets around that tricky issue as well.
Jolene says like more licensing for you.
Yay.
So on that note, if we put the registration fee at $2,000 to $3,000, does that give anybody heartburn? Okay.
What does that stack up against, like, liquor,
It's significantly
It's significantly higher.
but it's in line with our costs? That's really,
Well, because there's going to be the PD has to go out there and do an inspection. There's more work for these.
As long as we can tie it back to the work that the city staff is doing to establish this license, we're okay as far as the auditor is concerned.
Who would be responsible for the cameras? The cost to install them and the cost of the people that are leasing the space, or the police department or the
Property owner,
property?
and they have to turn it over within 48 hours after being asked by the police department, and they have to keep it for 30 days. I don't know how helpful it will be, but it's, again, just one more, kind of regulation.
Well, to the point that people are walking up with envelopes full of cash, someone gets robbed standing at one of these kiosks, then we'll have evidence, for sure. So, as far as I know, it hasn't happened yet, but somebody's gonna figure out that somebody's looking confused, standing at these kiosks, and might have a significant amount of cash on them.
And who picks up the cash? These kiosk owners come out in armored cars and pick it up, or?
I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, they probably have an armored car service or some type of service that gets the cash at the regular ATM. But I don't know for sure.
It was a little ambiguous in my research as well.
Camera might help in there, just like.
Could go for an ATM. So, truck.
Well, thank you both for your work on this. It's important to overregulate, but what a shame. Sad story with ones, especially young people taking advantage of it. So, any timeline on you think you might come back to?
I can have this ordinance ready for the next meeting if you want it.
I don't, urgency there, it can happen again tomorrow, right, I suppose, so fast we get things rolling, whatever.
Take a report tomorrow from somebody that, empties out their retirement savings.
Thanks. All right, next item, staffing update, Mark.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Council, I just wanted to bring this in front of you tonight to kind of get an initial set on my first month here as your administrator, and kind of obviously, one of my maybe biggest charges here as your administrator is to take a look at our staffing plan. We've got a number of holes in the staffing plan. We've had kind of a mishmash of organizational structure over the last couple of years, and it seems that that is an area that probably deserves my attention right away. So I've been kind of, as I'm doing everything, thinking that in terms of what does this look like in terms of staffing this, are we staffing this particular task the right way or not? So just wanted to give you my sort of first impressions. The memo that's in the packet is just that, which is once again, what do I see? And I think, you know, cut to the chase of the memo, the reality here is that we have a number of different openings that are just too obvious to ignore. And, the longer that they stay open, the longer we're gonna continue to have problems and perpetuate things that are being kicked down the road, right? So, finance director, human resources manager, I say that in that tone, like, just not 100% convinced what that will ultimately look like. We're working through that in terms of whether or not that's a full-time position all by itself, and that's all that person does is human resources, or if there's some other hats that that position might wear. And then, the planning lead or planning manager, the position that Abby has walked you guys through in the past. Again, that's a position that's very obvious that we need with the amount of zoning applications. I think you saw some data from Abby, I'm sorry, I saw it in the memo that she presented to me, but year over year, we're ratcheting it up. Shouldn't do that like this. And that, you can tell you haven't actually received a lot of zoning applications, you received concept plans that don't require a zoning application necessarily. And that number is sky high right now. So we're on the precipice of, and not be a tsunami, but it's a gigantic wave of applications that are probably on our doorstep here. So just the sheer churning through those applications, not with any sort of like forward-thinking, big picture, are these good for the community or not, just like, does this meet the zoning code, does it fit the comp plan? What do we have to do to, we got enough trees in the landscape plan, all that kind of churning of that is time consuming, and we have no choice, because you put a zoning application in, there's a 60-day window, or it's approved automatically, and we don't want any of that, right? We could backfill some of that task with consultants, and we are, some people sometimes, but, I think you want that handled in-house as much as you can. So those three things, and I wanna caution you too, that those are the three things on the sort of the upper level of staffing that I'm seeing. There's other holes down the food chain a little bit, and those are the things we're gonna look at as well. But what I wanna do is get these leads in place so that they can evaluate their own department, and in conjunction with me, the two of us can then say, do you think your staff is adequately sized or adequately arranged? And rather than me dictating to somebody, what their staff should look like, we can at least do that collaboratively. So it's important to get the leadership positions in place, and then build out the rest of the organization as you see fit. There are a couple of things that you'll see come in front of you fairly soon. We did interviews the other day for a building inspector position and for a public utility supervisor position. And so there are some of those positions down the food chain a little bit that are come in front of you again, because they were talked about for a number of years. I didn't want to stand in the way we can get those things rolling as well. So that's the sort of the elevator speech on it. I'm just opening it up to questions and have a more informal conversation about it. And in front of you, by the way, is you don't need the reading glasses quite as bad. I gave it up a little bit and highlighted the three spots there that are currently being discussed in this panel.
To make a lot of sense, your question and tone about the resources managers, what's your thought process there as far as trying to determine what, if multiple hats, what those hats might be?
Yeah, I think before we bring that back to you as a formal, like, let's go out and put on all the websites and get applications, we're gonna vet out that job description a little bit, I think internally, and look at it, whether or not there's any, you can actually see in this org chart, which is just, I don't want to caution everybody, this is literally the full copy of what was from 2024, the last version I was able to track down. You can see that there's an assistant city manager in there, or city administrator, and underneath that person is a human resources manager. We aren't right now saying we should hire an assistant city administrator, right? So even just the interaction between those two positions, like, should there be an assistant city administrator? Should that person be one and the same with the human resources manager, right? Should the assistant city administrator be a part or a slash to somebody else on your chart? So there's some of that that still needs to be vetted. But I think the fact of the matter is that I'm really convinced that there's at least, like, put numbers on next to it next year, like 75% of a person that is, it could be dedicated 100% to HR, right? Two guys to the left of me here would attest that they'd like to have some HR folks in place. Actually, what I think maybe my first department meeting, I just asked the department heads, I'm new here, you tell me what your biggest need is, and unanimously the vote was HR. I don't know if that's just because everyone hates doing HR. No one's not doing that yet. I think the reality is that there's just a lot of that work out there. It's not gonna get any simpler. You got paid family medical leave coming on board. My goodness, that sounds like fun. The legislature's still monkey with that, I see, so just keeping track of all that. And then just the risk cost of all that, right? One bad HR move and according to lawsuits and problems and all, I don't know.
Yeah,
Scared, but we have insurance and, we're okay, but I'm just saying,
Well, I think I can just, I guess, 2 years into this, maybe before, I'm actually surprised that like, that clearly has been the message for the last 2 years from staff, from even department heads, and so I think I'm 75 or 100%, I think it's only gonna go more, and just, I think we land on that person. That's just my experience from looking outside in, and then just feedback from staff over the last 2 years, especially when we didn't have an administrator, just a little bit more day-to-day conversation with staff, just pretty clear that this is needed. And so I think that would probably, now can they do a little bit of extra? Maybe, but it just seems like that just keeps coming back and back and back and back, so.
Well, I think to your point, it's just getting more and more complicated. I think there's been just some basic HR things like exit interviews and so on and so forth. An organization that hasn't, to my understanding, largely get it done. Having a background in finance, I know that HR and finance generally work together. And, as you hire that finance person, I hope it's not with HR.
and that's what's the tricky part, right? Is that any of the other hats, I'll call them, in my memo, that you try to lump with people, like you say, finance, sometimes, I know in Centerville, I had my finance guy doing IT just because one day he demonstrated an ability to work with a computer better than most people. Good for you, you're very entitled, right? And so, airport manager, is an HR person gonna necessarily wanna be the airport person? Nah, probably not, right? So, you've gotta wrestle with a little bit of that, but I'm just glad to hear this feedback, which is, like, if I think it's 75–80% of a person, if you're telling me you're pretty confident it's at least that helps me feel like pretty good about doing that, right? So that's why I put this on the agenda, to get that feedback, right? And I think, actually, like what you just said is, I wasn't even necessarily thinking about some of those little bit more niceties, I'll call them, right? Do we have to have exit interviews? No. But would it be nice to have, if we got a professional working here as an HR, to do some of those things? I'm more focused on my head that 75% was the thing you really gotta have, right? And if we can add to that extra 25% or so by doing some things that are things that professional organizations should be doing, exit interviews, type of things that go a little bit above and beyond the absolute necessary tasks, but get into things that are value added to the organization. I think that'd be a good thing. So, yeah, continued conversation.
I guess the other certain finance, it's pretty obvious, but the other is, that EDA planning manager role, and, I include that obviously in the budget. To your point about all the activity coming, is that something will trigger and hire, go out for?
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is, for sure, we're coming back with a finance director to the next meeting. And I think probably we'll come back, depending on if Abby and I can land on a description. Maybe that'll get that same meeting, but if not, within a month here or so. And then HR probably in a similar time frame, another month or so. Just, I don't want to drag any of these out too much further, but wanted to get feedback tonight and then kind of go back and hone some of these job descriptions. salary ranges and all that kind of stuff. Make sure we're pulling the trigger on exactly what we're all on the same page as we're hiring, so. I don't know, Abby, did you have anything you wanted to add to the process here?
No, not necessarily. I know that the position, we had talked about how to fund it and the EDA and the airport, I think in discussions with Mark and just seeing the volume that the community is gonna face. We really need somebody managing current planning. I'm just continually kind of getting sucked into land development, land use matters that I don't think, I think that initially, maybe a few years ago, was really what you thought you needed of a development director. It's really stifling our ability to kind of work on more proactive economic development matters. So I think we'll, work through that draft job description. You guys gave me the go-ahead. It was kind of a, hey Mark, let's take a look. Hey Mark, let's take a look. And I gave him some time, but that's why we really needed to kind of get this back and see if you guys were good and bring this back before you very soon.
Really, I think the background of that too is that, like Abby mentioned, that churning, there's no choice, we have to have that function, and so she's being pulled into that. But literally today, we had a multi-million-dollar, and it's not just a 2 or 3, we're talking multi-million-dollar project here, not too good detail, but that project that we're talking about demands her attention right now. Demands the EDA part of her job, is attention. It's a game-changing, like it's the biggest transaction we're gonna do in a long time. Can't be discussing whether or not we're gonna allow 50-foot lots versus 60-foot lots on Hillcrest 3rd edition, right? I mean, that's not what Abby's expectation be going to, right? And even mine too, I, my first week here, I thought, oh, I'll look at it, this little detail of that, pretty quickly learn that's not gonna be possible, right? So, there's just bigger fish to fry. You need Abby focused on those, I need Abby focused on those things too, because those are the kinds of things that make or break city budgets, make or break making of your town. Like, you don't wanna make this decision without your full attention, and you understand what's coming your way, do we want this or not, or we want to give or not give, and all that kind of stuff, so, it's the reality of being a growing city. There's not much you can do about it, and development comes at you at the pace it comes. So,
It's a good problem to have.
yeah, absolutely.
The only kind of hand in hand, and I know this is a bigger, overreaching topic, but a building official with management roles. And I think that's important sooner than later, and whether that happens before, after, or if building stays in fire, I don't know what thought is on that. If you can, not pull that trigger, but really work towards it, and maybe decide even more before we decide where we want to go.
Yeah, and I struggle with how much to put in front of you, and I don't think you're capable of handling complex situations, but it becomes a bit much, and so if everyone wanted to grab your pen and circle building official, that was my next thing I wanted to highlight. I decided not to, just because I want to keep it simple, but that is absolutely the question as to whether or not that moves up a level in this org chart. And that position is not filled currently, right? We don't have it. So, but remember when we're looking at this, there's some things that don't say vacant on them that still are vacant. Building inspector is plural right here. Another one, you'll note it says vacant, and it's just the interviews Dave and I, the utility superintendent. I think we're gonna make a hire there relatively soon. And that creates a different vacancy, another, if you hire with it. And then there's all sorts of other questions down the line, again, that I don't wanna get into too much, but if I had to choose the 4th thing that I should have highlighted, it would be building official for sure. So, again, related to the amount of work coming up, right? Concept plans, but again, building permits, right? And so that workflow, is not going anytime soon. And, you might say, well, geez, Mark, there's ebb and flow, we really want to staff up, but if this wave comes at us like we think that it's gonna, the inevitability of that wave of following building permits is at least a 5-year window, right? You shouldn't feel ashamed to staff up for a 5-year window, and that's a good chunk of work, right? So.
You get something
Yes, I mean, I think that's why we're here in March talking about this, is because these are decisions we need to make as we approach budget time, right? It's not like a road trip, so we should hire all these people. Oops, forgot about the math on this. You know, so this is absolutely part of, and that's why these three things were highlighted too, is because it's real easy decisions to make, because it's already in the budget, right? Next steps are things that might sort of be in the budget, or at least we've talked about, are they in the 10-year plan? I'm still getting my head around that. I met with Bruce and Kill from Elders a little bit ago, a few days ago, talked through that briefly, but he wanted to go back and kind of brush that up a little bit, remind himself about what's in, what's out. So that'll be kind of the next thing we'll probably do, is look at that 10-year plan and staffing rolled into that. And so we'll have a little bit more robust conversation around that whole issue next week. Did just get today from Jolene as well that the sort of the budget timeline that Kevin had in front of me last year. And everyone from staff was really, Alan, I know said you really appreciated that from the department heads standpoint, so we will bring that schedule back to you. Last year, we kind of adopted that as a path, or wanted to make sure we're all still on board, asking them if they had any, heartbreak over how that went down last year. But it sounds like most folks found it really helpful that they're kind of nice schedule, they're ahead of things pretty good, so.
So is that May, you start that
It
conversation?
was really April, so, yeah.
And so you would start that conversation before May finance.
I mean, I think, yes, I think we don't have much of a choice. I'm very scared that all these positions are gonna be tough to fill. They just, hiring right now is really a haircut, you know. I don't know where else to. Wish I could put that, but it's pretty good stories and bad stories.
If we had to go and do it or fully through a full budget cycle with red paths, that would be ideal, but make that work.
We have to.
Choice.
We have to, we have to go that direction, but, that is strong, but it's not, it's not like the realm of things I think that are important to have a finance director for. I don't know that the budget cycle is the most important here. I think things like investments and bond planning and long-range planning and those type of things is more important. And sort of just oversight of regulations, accounting practices and those things. Each department head kind of do their own budget, and finance director puts all that, I'm overseeing kind of a little bit, right? But, so I'm not petrified of that in terms of getting the finance director on board, the budget as much as I am other things that just, interest rates are still fairly high. You need someone watching where our money's invested in. Red Path is doing a little bit of that, but I don't like the only person paying attention, not just on Tuesdays from 8 to 10. You know what I mean? We need someone in there right away, so.
Okay. Similar question, where we have the CSO?
Chief, address that.
We received, I think, 14 applications, and we're doing our initial interviews actually tomorrow. So we're, it looks like there's some really good candidates, so we're pretty excited about it.
Other questions or thoughts? Okay, that's item update on military honors.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Council, we just, thought this should be a point of discussion. It was a topic that kind of came up here. We just had a situation where we, had the group of folks get ahold of us and let us know that we're going to be doing some military honors down at the park, by the lake. Called our park department and said, hey, by the way, why don't you let the PD know? So we let the PD know, and the PD said, well, we're not sure that that's allowed by ordinance. And, obviously, nobody wants to get on a stomp a veteran or doing a thing for somebody's, in someone's honor, right? But an ordinance is what an ordinance is. And so we chatted with our city attorney about it, and Amanda was nice enough to do some research and just kind of bring us up to speed on how we should be handling these things. And let us know if there's some overarching laws that maybe put our ordinance in a bad spot in terms of, our ordinance probably should have an exception for this. And essentially, you got no man if you want to just kind of expand on that.
Yeah, so the National Defense Authorization Act was passed in 2000, and long story short, it preempts our ordinance. So while our ordinance doesn't explicitly exempt these military funerals, the federal law definitely trumps us, and so that they win. We have to allow it. But from that perspective, the current ordinance, we should change it so that it's just clear, so that way the PD doesn't have to have that issue if somebody were to call and say, well, we have this on the books, why aren't you following it? It's probably advisable in the next, whenever, to revise it.
And it seems like a pretty simple, just a choice, right? I mean, obviously, we have the federal law, we have the state steer clear of, but where, when are these things appropriate? We want to have any restrictions on, probably not at midnight in a cul-de-sac, right? But all the other part, Legion, funeral parlor, cemetery, what have you. So there's probably reasonable expectations around them, and should be pretty obvious. Again, should be probably a uniform person. It shouldn't be some Joe Blow holding a gun, something here, pretending to do a 21-gun salute or something, right? So I think we've come up with reasonable expectations that law enforcement, it's clear to law enforcement what the parameters are, clear to the Legion and other people that would be involved, and make sure all stakeholders are taken care of. Obviously, again, nobody wants to stand in between someone being honored and veterans trying to do that.
So what do you think? Because I think timing is kind of the essence here, they're happening on a regular basis, we discuss them. So if they, they're making a call and not putting a bad spot.
Takes a little while just to do a public hearing and publish and all that kind of stuff. Or is this not its own word, it's going to be a public hearing?
I
don't think we'll need a public hearing.
No, because it's under 130 in our code.
I can shoot for next week, otherwise I for sure can get it by the meeting after that, if not next week. Is that soon enough?
Next week's getting a little
It's
full.
I'm not sure how on fire it is. If it's first meeting in April?
I guess, if it's the difference between, they're happening, that we're intimately involved in these things, and so, they happen. If it means backing off on the crypto thing by a week, this thing, so we're buttoned up, so we know what we're doing, that's great. If not, just communication to the Legion, the VFW, that, we're not happy, I guess whatever the comfort level is for the city, just allow it to happen until we have something. We're okay with that, but I don't think we have to button up that quick, but I just think it's matter just to clean it up.
Would it be helpful if I did something on official letterhead that could go to the Legion, that just says, there's a federal law that says you get to have these military honors if they're requested, and in the, we will be revamping in the ordinance, but in the interim, here's this, just citing to the federal law that wins, that trumps.
That would be great.
Okay.
Again, communication to both the PD and the Legion, so we're all on the same page.
These guys are on a bad spot.
Any other stakeholders, cemetery operators, all these things.
Okay, so letter for that, and then ordinance for April? Does that work?
That sounds good.
Okay, that I can get out in the next 2 days.
Would you want to have a public hearing on this?
I know that, some officials that, would like to come address council on it, what it is, so I don't know if it.
As long as you mention something, I'm sure they'll come and just voice their opinion on it. At least based on what I've heard from the Legion staff. I think that's.
So, I guess it doesn't be like, not necessarily,
Not that correct, yeah.
anything else to see? Updates or